At the beginning of the 10th century, Charles the Simple, the King of France, met Roland, the chief of the Vikings, at Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, and made him Duke of Normandy. It was on the coast of the English Channel, a short distance from the British Isles, the birth of a dukedom that would play a crucial role in the history of the Western world. The Normans came from the sea, and it's not surprising that their attention was drawn back to the sea and to its other shores. In 1066, William of Normandy, who was later to become William the Conqueror, set out to conquer England. It was not to be the only role played by the Normans in history. The old port of Honfleur reminds us that it was from there that Samuel Champlain left to found Quebec. It was less than a century later that sailors, also Normans, discovered the first site of New York City. Yes, Normandy, with its green pastures and superb cathedrals, was genuinely a crossroads of history. It's not astonishing, then, that it was called on to play a major role in the greatest tragedy of all time. Madness had seized the world. Nations who thought that an age of reason had arrived suddenly found themselves prisoners behind the blockhouses that stretched along their shores. The only ones who were left to come to the rescue of freedom were the sons of the old countries in Europe who had crossed an ocean to build a new world, and the descendants of those who had followed William the Conqueror to the other side of the Channel. As D-Day approached, a fleet of 5,000 ships, supported by 12,000 planes and gliders, assembled in England. 351,906 sailors, pilots, commandos, paratroopers, and soldiers, placed under the orders of General Dwight Eisenhower, with General Montgomery as Commander-in-Chief of Ground Forces at his side, would go into combat against German troops commanded by the famous Marshal Rommel. On June 5th, 1944, a little before midnight, the bombers of the Allied forces went into action. In less than 6 hours, they would drop more than 6,000 tons of bombs on the coastal defenses. At 0:20, the first gliders of the 6th British Airborne Division, commanded by Major General Gale, landed near their objectives. Their mission was to neutralize the area around Ranville to prevent reinforcements from arriving. And the men of the 5th Paratrooper Brigade seized the bridge on the Orne, as well as the bridge across the Caen Canal. It would be called the Pegasus Bridge, in honor of the fighting men who wore the winged horse as their emblem. At the same time, to neutralize the banks of the Merderet and the Douve in the west, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, commanded respectively by Generals Ridgway and Taylor, parachuted into the region around Sainte-Mère-Église, where they placed the first milestone for the road that would take the American Army to the German border and would come to be known as the Liberty Highway. Everything was ready for the launching of the biggest amphibious operation of all time. And at H-hour minus 30 minutes, the 8th and 9th Aerial Divisions began bombing the enemy's defenses, while at the other end of the horizon, Allied naval battleships, cruisers, and destroyers began to open fire on the coast. It was in this apocalyptic tumultuousness that the invasion fleet headed for the beaches. Lead with the minesweepers clearing the way for them were the duplex drives, Sherman tanks equipped with waterproof rubber skirts that enabled them to float. They would be the first to reach the shore. Behind them, the landing craft, armed with machine guns and cannons, lay down covering fire and advanced on the beach's defenders. The tanks do not wait to reach shore before opening fire. And then come the landing barges, who, after leaving their transport ships, race for the shore with their assault troops. Men with set faces who try to see in front of them the land that they have come to free, the land in which many will die before having a chance to know it. At H-8, the landing craft, armed with 800 to 1,000 rocket launchers, spray the beaches with a torrent of fire. Eight minutes later, in a momentary lull before the storm, the barges unload their human cargo to advance through the water towards the beaches, where their mission is to wipe out the last pockets of resistance. The battle whose outcome will determine the fate of a continent has begun. The invasion fleet sets ashore the men who will turn D-Day into a victory for freedom. And the tumult of artillery salvos no longer lets one hear the cries of men who are suffering. At Sword Beach, between Lyons-sur-Mer and Rivabella, the British Army's 3rd Division, under the command of Major General René, has just debarked. Its mission is to take Caen and to reinforce the airborne forces who have been defending the bridges on the Orne from relentless enemy attacks since midnight. Its armored vehicles reach the Pegasus Bridge and join forces with the airborne troops, but a counterattack from the German 21st Panzer Division prevents them from linking up with the Canadian troops who have landed at Juno Beach. It was the Canadian Infantry's 3rd Division, commanded by General Keller, which was given the mission of leading the attack on Juno Beach. Delayed by rough seas, the commandos would lose many of the men and much of their materiel on the beach's obstacles. But the Canadians were anxious to avenge their comrades killed at Dieppe 2 years earlier. Enemy resistance would not be enough to keep them from landing 21,400 men. Equipped with bicycles, they would penetrate inland and join up with the 50th British Infantry Division holding the Gold Beach sector. On the evening of June 6th, the 50th British Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Graham, even though failing to achieve all their objectives, had still managed to establish a bridgehead, and its armored vehicles controlled Highway 13 and the outskirts of Bayeux, which the next day would become the first city in liberated France. The sectors comprising Utah and Omaha beaches had been entrusted to American troops. Encountering relatively light resistance when they tried to land, the troops landing at Utah Beach nevertheless had to confront rough seas which sank tanks and drowned men. That did not stop the 4th Division under the command of Major General Barton from reaching its objectives and lending a strong helping hand to the airborne troops fighting in Sainte-Mère-Église. The 1st Infantry Division, reinforced by the 29th Division's 116th Regiment, which had been entrusted with Omaha Beach, was not so lucky. Under the orders of Major General Hubner, the division should have reached Isigny, taken control of Highway 13, and pushed on to Vaucelles near Bayeux. Destiny decided otherwise. Omaha Beach became the most murderous zone in the D-Day fighting. At H-hour, when the first wave of infantrymen went into smoke from artillery explosions and protective smoke screens, the ocean currents separated the barges, making it impossible to regroup the units. The men, greeted with murderous fire from automatic weapons and mortars, remained pinned down among the obstacles placed on the beach by the enemy. The second wave, which met the same heavy fire, was unable to move any further. 9:30, with the few units who had managed to set foot on the shore still pinned down on the beach, the German command could consider that the attacking forces had failed. was only due to the courage of a handful of men, officers, sergeants, and soldiers that the Battle of Omaha Beach did not end in complete disaster. Forming themselves into groups with whomever they could find, they left the shelter of the sand dunes and crossed the minefields towards the summit of the crest held by the Germans, while two destroyers came to within 1,000 yards of the shore to provide covering fire. Little by little, the exhausted men regrouped, triumphed over their fear, took control of the neighboring villages, and freed the supplies that up until then had been stranded on the beach under enemy fire. Out of 2,200 tons of equipment, only 100 tons remained in working condition. 5,000 men had fallen. When one looks at Omaha Beach, where wave after wave of decimated companies rose up to assault the crest, it's impossible not to feel a moment of emotion. It is nevertheless at Pointe-du-Hoc, where time has still not managed to erase the signs of combat, where we can better see the harshness of the battle. To knock out the artillery battery, which was supposed to have been at its summit, 225 Rangers of the 2nd Battalion, under the command of Colonel Rudder, threw themselves into the assault against the cliffs. The cannons had already been moved, but the Germans counterattacked anyway. When on June 8th, the Rangers left the rock, where they had flown the Stars and Stripes after 2 days of bloody combat, there were only 80 men left, and most of those were wounded. The men who fell in these cliffs and dunes now lie beside their comrades at the cemetery at Omaha Beach. The monument erected in their honor speaks to us of the resurrection of man, or of a world. The white crosses that reach as far as the eye can see speak more eloquently than words of the price of liberty. In just one day, June 6, 1944, more than 10,000 men were killed, wounded, or reported missing, but the Allied forces had landed. And the British would be able in a few days to construct the artificial port at Arromanches, one of the major feats of the war. With its 12 square kilometers of surface area, it took in more than 9,000 tons of materiel a day to enable the offensive to go on. One after another, cities and towns fell to the Allies. The nightmare was almost over, and amid the ruins, the children of France saluted freedom. On August 21st, 1944, the Battle of Normandy ended. The Germans had lost 450,000 men, killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, and the Allies launched their attacks against the heart of Europe. Since then, the ruins have been rebuilt, and the cities that were once destroyed have become cities once again. But the world cannot forget, and even if it tried, the cemeteries of Normandy are there to remind us of the cost of the madness of men. There are Americans, British, Canadians, Polish, Germans. The same peace is here, whether their deaths were in one camp or the other, as if it were all futility, as if the only thing that had really counted in this battle of titans was the surpassing of oneself.